You have invested years in relationship with the avoidant, building what you believed was deep, intimate bond forged through shared experiences, through vulnerability you offered, through patience you demonstrated during their withdrawal periods, through understanding you provided when they struggled with intimacy. You have felt profound connection to them. Connection that penetrated beneath their defended surface to the wounded human you believed existed underneath. Connection that made you willing to tolerate their patterns because you trusted that beneath their defenses they felt the same depth of bond that you experienced. You have interpreted their anxiety about losing you as evidence they cared deeply, their occasional moments of vulnerability as proof that genuine intimacy existed between you, their returns after withdrawal as demonstration that the bond pulled them back, despite their defended fear. You have built entire understanding of the relationship on assumption that you were both experiencing same fundamental connection, that you were both bonded to each other in ways that made the relationship significant and real, despite the avoidance patterns making that bond difficult to sustain. This understanding has sustained you through the relationship's difficulties, has justified your patience with their limitations, has made their defended behavior tolerable because you believed underneath everything existed mutual bond that would eventually overcome their defensive structure if you remained present and understanding long enough. Yet this understanding, this assumption of mutual bonding, contains devastating misperception that keeps you trapped in relationship that cannot meet your needs, that prevents you from making clear-eyed decisions about whether continuing serves your well-being, that maintains false hope based on connection you felt, but they did not experience in same way. The painful truth you need to face is that the avoidant never bonded to you in the way you bonded to them, that what you interpreted as evidence of deep connection was actually anxiety about loss rather than grief about losing specifically you, that the person they related to throughout the relationship was not your authentic self, but rather was idea of you that served their defended needs without requiring genuine intimacy their defensive structure cannot tolerate. The avoidant experienced attachment to you, nervous system activation when you withdrew, anxiety about potential loss, desire to maintain access to your presence. Yet attachment without bonding is not love, is not intimate connection, is not the mutual deep seeing and cherishing that you experienced toward them and assumed they experienced toward you. They related to function you served, to stability your presence provided, to idealized fantasy version of you that they constructed, to avoid knowing your authentic complexity, to utility you offered through your patience and accommodation of their defended limitations. When the avoidant grieves losing you, they grieve losing the comfortable relationship where you accommodated their patterns, losing the secure base you provided that allowed them to venture into occasional vulnerability, losing the services and functions you performed that made their defended life easier, not losing the irreplaceable, unique human you actually are with your specific qualities, wounds, dreams, and complexity that genuine bonding would require them to know and cherish. This recognition will hurt because it requires releasing the comforting belief that your connection was mutual, that your bond was real in ways the avoidant felt as deeply as you felt it, that the relationship contained the depth and significance you experienced even when their behavior suggested otherwise. Yet facing this painful truth is the only path to your freedom. They experienced attachment without bonding, the crucial difference you missed. The avoidant demonstrated clear signs of attachment to you throughout the relationship. Anxiety when you withdrew or created distance, distress when separation seemed possible, motivation to restore connection after their own withdrawal periods, ongoing monitoring of your life and your availability, even during times when they maintained defended distance. You interpreted these attachment behaviors as evidence that the avoidant had bonded to you, that they cared deeply about you specifically, that the connection between you was mutual even when their defended patterns prevented them from expressing that connection adequately. Yet attachment and bonding represent fundamentally different psychological processes and the avoidance demonstrated attachment to you does not constitute evidence of the bonding you assumed accompanied that attachment. Attachment operates at nervous system level as biological imperative that monitors for threats to connection with significant others, that generates anxiety when those connections face disruption, that motivates behavior aimed at maintaining proximity and access to attachment figures. This attachment system evolved to ensure survival through maintaining connection with others who provide safety, resources, and support. The attachment system activates regardless of whether genuine intimate bonding exists. It responds to loss of familiar presence, to disruption of established patterns, to threats to security that consistent presence provides. The avoidance nervous system became attached to you through repeated interaction, through your consistent presence, through the stability and comfort your availability created in their life. This attachment generates real anxiety when you withdraw, creates genuine distress at prospect of permanent loss, motivates their returns after their withdrawal periods. Yet all these attachment manifestations can occur without the avoidant having developed genuine intimate bond to who you actually are as unique specific person. Bonding represents entirely different process that requires knowing another person in their authentic complexity, holding space for their full humanity, including their wounds and limitations, cherishing their specific qualities that make them irreplaceable, integrating them into one's sense of self and future in ways that make their absence create void no one else can fill. Bonding requires vulnerability to truly see and be seen, capacity to hold another's authentic self, including aspects that are difficult or disappointing, willingness to be affected and changed by intimate knowledge of specific other person. Bonding creates connection, where the other person matters, not for functions they serve or stability they provide, but for who they irreplaceably are, where losing them represents loss of their unique presence, rather than simply loss of familiar comfort or useful services. The avoidance defensive structure specifically prevents the vulnerability that genuine bonding requires. To bond with you, the avoidant would need to lower defenses sufficiently to see you in your full authentic complexity, rather than relating to idealized version that serves their needs. They would need to allow themselves to be known by you in their defended wounded state, rather than managing your perception through controlled presentations of self. They would need to integrate you into their identity and their future in ways that would make losing you feel devastating, rather than maintaining defended separation that protects them from dependence they fear. They would need to develop capacity to hold your authentic emotional experience, including your hurt about their patterns, rather than defending against your emotions through minimization or withdrawal. All these requirements of genuine bonding directly threaten the defended position the avoidance psychological structure exists to maintain. The crucial difference you missed emerges in recognizing that the avoidance attachment behaviors, their anxiety about losing you, their returns after withdrawal, their monitoring of your availability, all serve their defended comfort rather than reflecting genuine intimate bond. The avoidant becomes anxious when you withdraw, not because they deeply cherish your irreplaceable unique self, but because your withdrawal threatens the stable, comfortable dynamic where you accommodate their patterns, because losing you means losing the security and functions you provide, because separation activates their nervous system's threat detection, regardless of whether they have genuinely bonded to you as specific person. The avoidant returns after their withdrawal periods, not because intimate bond pulls them back to you specifically, but because their attachment system cannot tolerate complete disconnection, because they have become dependent on your presence in ways their defended consciousness cannot acknowledge, because restoring access to you restores the comfort and stability your presence provides their defended position. The attachment without bonding manifests in how the avoidant relates to you throughout the relationship. They demonstrate interest in you when your presence serves their immediate needs or desires, yet withdraw. When intimacy requires sustained vulnerability, they seek your support during their difficulties, yet remain unavailable when you need support during yours. They maintain relationship with version of you that fits their defended requirements, patient, understanding, accommodating, yet struggle when your authentic complexity emerges in ways that challenge their defended comfort. They position you in their life as stable presence they can access when they want connection, yet maintain ultimate separateness that prevents genuine integration of you into their identity and future. All these patterns reflect attachment to functions you serve and comfort you provide, rather than bonding to your authentic, irreplaceable self. The attachment without bonding also reveals itself in what the avoidant does not know about you despite extended time together. They lack detailed knowledge of your internal experience, your fears, your dreams, your wounds, because genuine curiosity about your inner life would require intimacy their defenses prevent. They maintain surface understanding of your preferences and patterns, sufficient to navigate relationship, yet lack the deep knowing that bonding creates through sustained vulnerable attention to another's full humanity. They remember information about you that is useful to them, yet fail to retain details that matter to you, but serve no function in their defended relationship with you. The gaps in their knowing expose that they have not engaged in the sustained, vulnerable attention that transforms attachment into bonding. Understanding the difference between attachment and bonding requires recognizing that the avoidance nervous system can become attached to you, generating anxiety about loss, motivating maintenance of connection, without the avoidance psychology developing genuine intimate bond that would require vulnerability their defensive structure prevents. The attachment creates real experiences for the avoidant. They do feel anxiety when you withdraw. They do feel motivated to restore connection. They do experience their relationship with you as significant to their well-being. Yet these attachment experiences do not constitute the mutual intimate bonding you assumed accompanied them. The avoidant has attached to the idea of you, to the functions you serve, to the comfort and stability your presence provides, all while their defensive structure successfully prevented the vulnerable knowing and being known that genuine bonding requires. Your interpretation of their attachment behaviors as evidence of bonding kept you invested in relationship with someone who was attached to you without being bonded to you, who needed you without knowing you, who feared losing you without cherishing your irreplaceable, authentic self. The person they showed up for was the idea of you, not the actual you. The avoidant maintained relationship with carefully constructed version of you that existed primarily in their defended perception, rather than with your authentic, complex actual self. This idealized version aligned with their defended needs and requirements, patient beyond reasonable limits, understanding that never wavered despite their patterns consistently harming you, accommodating to the point of self-abandonment, emotionally regulated in ways that prevented them from having to face your authentic hurt or disappointment. The avoidant related to this constructed version throughout the relationship, showing up for the person they needed you to be rather than for the person you actually were, with your legitimate needs, your emotional complexity, your wounds that deserved care, your authentic self that included dimensions beyond your function in their defended life. The construction of idealized version served crucial defensive function for the avoidant by allowing them to maintain relationship while avoiding genuine intimacy that knowing your authentic self would require. Relating to real you would mean facing that you have needs they cannot meet, emotions they struggle to handle, complexity that challenges their defended preferences, authentic self that sometimes disappoints or frustrates them in ways genuine intimacy must accommodate. Relating to idealized version allows the avoidant to bypass all these challenging dimensions by interacting with fantasy you that is always patient, always understanding, always available in ways that serve their defended comfort without requiring them to stretch beyond their limited capacity or to face their inadequacy when their limitations harm you. The idealized version typically emphasized your strength while ignoring your vulnerability, your capacity to support them while denying your need for support, your understanding of their patterns while dismissing your hurt about those patterns. The avoidant related to you as person who could handle their withdrawal without being devastated, who could tolerate their defended limitations without feeling rejected, who could accommodate their patterns indefinitely without reaching breaking point. This construction allowed them to maintain relationship while avoiding responsibility for how their patterns affected you. If you are the strong, understanding, patient person they constructed you to be, then your hurt about their patterns must reflect your temporary emotional state rather than legitimate response to harmful treatment, must represent your failure to maintain the strength and understanding they need from you rather than their failure to provide adequate partnership. The avoidance relationship with idealized version rather than with authentic you reveals itself in how they responded when your actual complexity emerged in ways that contradicted their construction. When you expressed genuine hurt about their patterns, the avoidant responded with surprise or defensiveness, as if your hurt contradicted who you are supposed to be, as if your pain represented departure from your true nature rather than authentic response to their harmful behavior. When you established boundaries about treatment you would no longer tolerate, the avoidant experienced your boundaries as rejection or as you becoming a different person rather than recognizing your boundaries as authentic, you finally protecting yourself after extended period of accommodation. When you demonstrated needs they could not meet, the avoidant interpreted your needs as pressure or as evidence of your inadequacy rather than as legitimate requirements of healthy partnership that authentic you always possessed but suppressed to maintain relationship with their defended limitations. The idealized version also typically involved the avoidant attributing to you characteristics or capacities that served their defended narrative without corresponding to reality. They may have constructed you as a person who did not really need emotional intimacy, despite your repeated expressions of needing deeper connection. They may have characterized you as a person who preferred independence, despite your demonstrations of desiring greater interdependence. They may have decided you were satisfied with their minimal presence, despite your communications about needing more consistency and availability. These constructed attributions allowed the avoidant to maintain comfortable belief that they were meeting your needs adequately, that their defended limitations were acceptable to you, that relationship was functioning well from your perspective despite substantial evidence to the contrary. The avoidant showed up for this idealized version in ways they could not show up for authentic you because idealized version made no demands that exceeded their defended capacity, created no discomfort that required them to stretch beyond their limitations, generated no complexity that challenged their preferred simple narrative about the relationship. The avoidant could be present for constructed you who was always understanding, always patient, always strong. The avoidant struggled to be present for actual you who sometimes needed support they could not provide, who felt hurt they did not want to face, who had needs they could not meet, who possessed emotional complexity that required more vulnerability than their defensive structure allows. The devastating recognition emerges in facing that the avoidant never truly knew you, because knowing you would have required dismantling the idealized construction and facing your authentic complexity. They did not know your deepest fears because genuine knowledge would have required emotional intimacy their defenses prevent. They did not understand your actual needs because understanding would have revealed they could not meet those needs and would have forced uncomfortable accountability. They did not see your wounds because seeing would have required them to provide care and attention. Their defended position prevents them from offering. The avoidant maintained carefully managed ignorance about who you actually are because knowing you authentically would have destroyed their comfortable defended relationship with the constructed version that served their needs without requiring genuine intimacy. Understanding that the avoidant showed up for idea rather than for actual you requires facing that the relationship contained fundamental asymmetry in knowing and being known. You work to understand the avoidant's authentic defended self, to see beneath their patterns to their wounds, to know them in their complexity, including their limitations. The avoidant related to constructed version of you that allowed them to avoid equivalent vulnerable knowing, that maintained them in comfortable defended position, where they could believe they were in adequate relationship without facing reality that they did not know or show up for your authentic self. The person they feared losing when you withdrew was not the complex authentic you, but rather the idealized version that served their defended needs, the patient, understanding, accommodating person they needed you to be, rather than the real human you actually are. With legitimate needs they cannot meet and authentic complexity their defensive structure cannot hold. Their grief is about losing the function you served, not about losing who you are. The avoidant demonstrates genuine grief when facing permanent loss of you. Distress that appears authentic, pain that seems real, expressions of missing you that feel heartfelt. You interpret this grief as evidence that they valued you deeply, that you mattered profoundly to them, that the bond between you was significant enough to generate real suffering when severed. Yet the nature of the avoidance grief reveals crucial information about what they are actually mourning, when they face losing you. And this revelation exposes painful truth about what you represented to them throughout the relationship. The avoidant grieves losing the functions you served in their life, the stability and comfort your presence provided, the services you offered that made their defended existence easier, not losing your irreplaceable, unique presence as the specific, complex human you actually are. The functional nature of their grief manifests in what the avoidant mourns specifically when they process losing you. They grieve losing the person who understood them without requiring equivalent understanding in return. They mourn losing the secure base you provided that allowed them to venture into occasional vulnerability, while knowing they could retreat to the safety of your patient acceptance. They feel distressed about losing the person who accommodated their defended patterns without demanding reciprocal accommodation. They miss the comfort of your presence that made them feel less alone without requiring the sustained intimacy that genuine companionship demands. They grieve losing the emotional regulation you provided that allowed them to remain defended because you managed the relationship's emotional content they could not manage. All these losses reflect mourning for what you did rather than for who you are, for services you provided rather than for your authentic, irreplaceable self. The grief about losing function reveals itself in how quickly the avoidance seeks to replace you with someone who can serve similar functions despite their claimed deep feelings about losing you specifically. If the avoidant genuinely bonded to your irreplaceable, unique self, losing you would create void that no one else could fill, because what they lost was your specific presence, your particular qualities, your unique way of being in the world. Yet the avoidant moves relatively quickly toward finding someone new who can provide similar functions, someone patient who will accommodate their defended patterns, someone understanding who will not demand more than their defended capacity, someone who will provide the secure base and emotional regulation they need without requiring equivalent reciprocation. The replaceability of your position in their life exposes that what they valued was not you specifically, but rather the role you filled. Not your authentic self, but rather the functions you performed that made their defended life comfortable. The functional nature of the avoidant's grief also manifests in what they do not mourn about losing you. They do not grieve losing opportunity to know your authentic self more deeply because they never truly pursued that knowing. They do not mourn losing your specific dreams and hopes for shared future because they never integrated those dreams into their own future vision. They do not miss your particular way of seeing the world, your unique perspective, your specific humor or insights because they never engaged deeply enough with your authentic complexity to develop appreciation for these irreplaceable qualities. The absence of grief about losing your authentic specific self exposes that the relationship never involved the deep mutual knowing that would make your particular presence irreplaceable to them. The avoidant may express that they miss you, that they think about you constantly, that losing you feels unbearable. Yet the content of what they miss reveals the functional nature of their loss. They miss coming home to your presence that provided comfort after difficult days. They miss your support during their struggles while remaining oblivious to how rarely they supported you during yours. They miss the sex and physical intimacy that you provided while maintaining emotional distance that prevented actual vulnerability. They miss the stability of established relationship that your consistent presence created while ignoring that you were doing all the work to maintain that stability. They miss feeling less alone while failing to recognize they kept you at emotional distance that prevented genuine companionship. All they're missing reflects grief about losing services and comforts rather than about losing your specific irreplaceable presence. The functional grief also reveals itself in the avoidant's focus on their own suffering rather than on what you lost through the relationship and its ending. When the avoidant processes the separation, they center their own pain, their own loss, their own difficulty adjusting to your absence, demonstrating ongoing self-focus that characterized the relationship throughout. Someone who genuinely bonded to you would hold awareness of what you suffered through their patterns, would feel grief not only for their own loss, but for having hurt someone they deeply cared about, would demonstrate concern for your well-being after separation. The avoidant's grief remains focused on their own experience of loss, on their own adjustment to your absence, on their own suffering, revealing that even in loss they relate to you through lens of what you provided to them, rather than holding genuine appreciation for who you are beyond your function in their life. The speed with which the avoidant's acute grief resolves also exposes its functional rather than bonded nature. When people lose someone to whom they were genuinely deeply bonded, the acute grief eventually softens, yet the sense of loss persists across years. The recognition that specific irreplaceable person is gone continues affecting them indefinitely. The avoidance grief tends to resolve more quickly once they secure similar functions elsewhere, once new person provides comparable patience and accommodation, once they restore comfortable defended relationship with someone willing to serve similar role you served. The replacement's capacity to resolve the avoidance grief exposes that what they were grieving was functional loss. That new person serving those functions can remedy rather than loss of your specific, irreplaceable self that no replacement could address. Understanding that the avoidance grief is about losing function rather than losing you requires facing that you were serving role in their defended life rather than being genuinely known and cherished for your authentic, irreplaceable self. The painful recognition involves accepting that while you bonded deeply to them, while losing them creates void because you knew and valued their specific unique presence, their experience of losing you operates at an entirely different level. They grieve losing comfortable relationship, losing services you provided, losing stable presence that made their defended life easier. Yet they do not grieve losing your authentic self because they never genuinely bonded to your authentic self deeply enough to experience your particular presence as irreplaceable. Your grief about losing them reflects genuine bonding. Their grief about losing you reflects attachment to functions you served. This asymmetry explains why you feel their loss so profoundly, while they move forward relatively quickly. You lost someone you genuinely knew and bonded to. They lost someone who served a useful role they can find someone else to fill. You bonded to their potential, while they bonded to your utility. Throughout the relationship, you invested deeply in loving, not just who the avoidant demonstrated themselves to be through their consistent patterns, but who you believed they could become if they developed capacity to access the vulnerable, authentic self you glimpsed during their rare, undefended moments. You bonded to their potential, to the version of them that could exist if they did the healing work, if they developed capacity for sustained intimacy, if they could overcome their defended limitations to show up fully in relationship. You loved the wounded human beneath their defenses, cherished the glimpses of vulnerability they occasionally revealed, invested in the future version of them that would emerge if they could address the fears and wounds that drove their defended patterns. This bonding to potential kept you engaged through their inadequate present behavior because you loved not just who they were, but who they could become. This bonding to potential reflected your capacity for seeing beyond surface presentations to deeper possibilities, your faith in human capacity for growth and transformation, your willingness to remain present while someone worked through their limitations toward becoming a fuller version of themselves. The capacity itself is beautiful. It reflects hope, generosity, vision that can see potential where others see only limitation. Yet when directed toward the avoidant, your bonding to potential created fundamental problem. You invested in relationship with future version of them that might never materialize while tolerating present version whose patterns consistently harmed you. You loved the person they could be rather than making decisions based on the person they demonstrated themselves to be through sustained behavioral patterns across extended time.